moment my parents smiled and told me it was time for me to leave, I understood something I hadn't been ready to name before. This wasn't about love. It wasn't even about concern. It was about timing. I had graduated only days earlier. My degree was still sitting on the kitchen table, the ink barely dry, the edges of the paper not yet softened by time or handling. I hadn't celebrated properly. I hadn't even decided what direction my life was supposed to take next. I was still standing in that strange, in-between space where everything feels fragile and unfinished. That was when my sister walked into my grandfather's living room as if it already belonged to her. She didn't slam the door, she didn't raise her voice, she didn't even look nervous. She smiled. Light, polite, almost cheerful, and said, "The house is taken care of now. You should probably start packing." No shouting, no argument, no explanation. Just a calm announcement, delivered the way people speak when they believe the conversation is already over. My parents stood behind her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. They wore the same expressions, gentle, reasonable, carefully practiced. The kind of faces people use when they want to look kind while doing something unkind. What none of them asked was whether I agreed. What none of them asked was what I had already done. They still saw me as the version of myself they were most comfortable with. The quiet one, the accommodating one, the daughter who stepped back without needing to be told. They assumed I would do what I always did, and when they left that afternoon, relaxed and confident, they believed the decision was final. They had no idea that weeks earlier, I had already made one deliberate, irreversible move. One that would change everything the next time they came back, especially on the Sunday they returned with movers, convinced the house was already theirs. I didn't learn how to take up less space all at once. It happened slowly, in small moments that never felt important enough to fight over. In my family, affection wasn't something you asked for. It was something that landed where it pleased, usually without warning and without explanation. My parents, Thomas and Evelyn, liked to tell people they treated both their daughters equally. If someone asked directly, they said it with confidence, as if it were a fact that didn't require examination. On paper, maybe they even believed it. In real life, equality dissolved in the moments no one talked about. My younger sister Rachel had a way of filling every room she entered. She didn't do it loudly or aggressively. She just existed in a way that drew attention toward her, like gravity. When she was upset, plans shifted. Conversations paused. Everyone adjusted. If Rachel wanted something, it was discussed immediately, carefully, thoroughly, like a problem that needed solving. When I wanted something, the response was always softer, quieter, and final. "You're mature," my mother would say, already half turned toward Rachel. "You understand," my father added. "You don't need as much." So I learned not to need. I learned how to nod when plans changed at the last minute. I learned how to smile when Rachel's achievements were celebrated louder, longer, with more pride. I learned how to accept praise quietly and disappointment even more quietly. Over time, it became easier not to ask at all. Asking meant hoping, and hoping usually ended with being reminded why I shouldn't. From the outside, we looked fine. Better than fine. We were the kind of family neighbors described as close. We had weekend dinners, holiday photos, birthdays that looked warm and complete in pictures. But inside our house, attention moved in one direction. I wasn't abused, I wasn't ignored completely, I was simply overlooked. And somehow, that made everything harder to explain, even to myself. The only place where I didn't feel that way was my grandfather's house. Samuel Hart lived in a small coastal town, in a house that never tried to impress anyone. The porch boards creaked in the same places every time. The air always smelled faintly of salt, pine, and old wood that had absorbed decades of weather. At night, if you listened closely, you could hear the ocean. Steady, patient, unconcerned with human drama. When I was there, no one rushed me. No one compared me to anyone else. No one hinted that I was too much or not enough. My grandfather listened when I spoke. Not politely, not absently, but intentionally, like my words mattered simply because they were mine. As he got older, I started coming more often. At first it was small things, picking up groceries, driving him to appointments, helping sort mail that piled up faster than he could manage. Later, it became more. Managing bills when he started forgetting dates. Sitting with him on quiet afternoons when the house felt too still. Watching old shows together without talking much at all. I showed up not because anyone asked me to. I showed up because in that house I didn't have to earn my place. My parents and Rachel visited too, but mostly on holidays, or when something needed to be discussed. I noticed the difference even if I didn't have language for it yet. I told myself families were complicated, that everyone showed love in their own way, that keeping the peace was worth the cost. By the time I finished school and walked across that graduation stage, my grandfather was gone. But his house remained. It was the last place where I had ever felt fully seen. I didn't yet understand how much that mattered, or how quickly my family would try to take that feeling away from me. After my graduation, nothing changed right away. And more than anything, that should have warned me. I stayed in my grandfather's house, telling myself I deserved a moment to breathe. I went back to work. I unpacked slowly. I let the quiet settle without questioning it. But families like mine don't stay quiet for long, not when there's something to gain. The first question came from my mother. "So," she said one evening on the phone, her tone casual in a way that felt practiced. "Have you thought about what you're going to do with the house?" I remember standing in the kitchen, staring at the same spot on the counter while she spoke. She didn't ask how I was holding up. She didn't mention my graduation, just the house. "I'm still figuring things out," I said carefully. "Well," she replied, "it's a lot of responsibility for one person. Property taxes aren't cheap, maintenance either. We just worry about you. We just worry about you." It sounded kind. Reasonable. Almost loving. If it had ended there, I might have believed it. But it didn't. The calls started coming more often after that. Not aggressive, not demanding, just persistent. My mother would call in the evenings, always when she knew I was likely home, when the house felt quiet enough that her voice could fill it. She asked the same questions in slightly different ways, like someone testing which phrasing would finally unlock compliance. "Are you sleeping okay there? Doesn't it feel lonely? Wouldn't it be easier if you didn't have to handle everything alone?" Each question carried an answer inside it, the one she wanted me to give. When I didn't, her tone changed just enough to be noticeable. Still calm. Still gentle, but tighter around the edges. Rachel didn't call at first. That should have been the clearest sign of all. My sister never rushed into situations that required patience. She waited. She observed. She let other people soften the ground for her. I knew her well enough to understand what silence meant. It meant she was preparing. They showed up on a Saturday morning without warning. I heard the tires on the gravel driveway before I saw the car. The sound made my stomach tighten in a way I couldn't immediately explain. My body reacted before my mind caught up. Rachel stepped out first, dressed casually but carefully. Jeans that looked worn but weren't. A soft sweater that made her look approachable. My parents followed, carrying bags as if they were staying longer than planned. No one asked if it was a good time. They walked in like the house had already begun to shift ownership. "Oh wow," my mother said, looking around. "You haven't changed much." It wasn't a compliment. It was an observation, one that implied something should have been done differently. Rachel ran her fingers along the back of the couch. "This place has so much potential," she said lightly, "with the right updates." I watched them move through the rooms, touching things, commenting on small details that had never bothered them before. A crack in the paint. An old light fixture. The windows that stuck when humidity crept in from the ocean. Every flaw became evidence. Every comment added weight to the story they were building, one where I was overwhelmed, underprepared, and in need of guidance. They didn't sit down right away. They wandered first. Like inspectors. When we finally gathered in the living room, my father leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. He looked thoughtful, concerned. The same posture he used when delivering decisions he expected to be accepted. "We've been talking," he began. Of course they had. "We just think," my mother added quickly, "that maybe this isn't the best situation for you right now." Rachel nodded sympathetically, her head tilted slightly, like she was already mourning something. "You're at a transition point," she said. "New graduate, new phase of life. This house is. A lot. A lot." That word again. They talked about practicality, about finances, about how difficult it would be for someone in my position to manage a property like this. They talked about how Rachel and her husband were already looking for something larger, about how much sense it would make for family to keep the house in the right hands. They talked for a long time. They never once asked what I wanted. It was Rachel who finally said the quiet part out loud. "We could take it over," she offered, smiling. "You wouldn't have to worry about anything. You could stay for a while, obviously, until you figure things out. Stay for a while. Not live. Not keep. Stay. Like a guest. I felt something settle in my chest at that moment. Not anger, not sadness, but clarity. This wasn't about helping me. This was about repositioning me. They had already decided who this house belonged to in their minds. All that remained was convincing me to agree so they could feel good about it. When I didn't respond immediately, my mother reached out and touched my arm. "We're not forcing anything," she said softly. "We just want what's best for you." She had said those words my entire life. And suddenly, I understood exactly what they meant. That night, after they left, the house felt different. Not emptier, heavier. I walked from room to room, noticing things I had never paid attention to before. The way the floor creaked near the hallway. The faint discoloration on the wall where my grandfather's favorite chair used to sit. I stopped in his old study. The desk was still there, untouched. The same lamp. The same drawers I had helped him organize years earlier. I opened the bottom drawer without thinking. Inside was a folder I had seen once before but never opened. My name was written on it in his handwriting. Not neatly. Not carefully. But intentionally. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were documents. Old, yellowed at the edges, but clearly important. Notes. Copies of correspondence. And a letter, folded once, placed carefully on top. I sat down before I read it. I don't remember deciding to. I just knew my legs wouldn't hold me if I didn't. "If you're reading this," the letter began, "then you're probably questioning whether you're allowed to keep what was given to you." I stopped breathing for a moment. "Families are strange things," he wrote. "They often believe love gives them the right to decide for you. It doesn't." My grandfather had always been quiet, but when he spoke, there was no wasted language. Every sentence carried weight. "I've watched you give up space your whole life," the letter continued. "Not because you're weak, but because you're kind. People confuse the two. Don't." I read the letter twice. Then again. By the time I finished, my hands were steady. Because for the first time, someone wasn't asking me to step back. Someone was telling me to stand still. The next morning, I called a lawyer. Not my parents, not a family friends. Someone recommended quietly, professionally, and without emotional investment. I didn't explain everything. I didn't need to. I just said, "I need to understand what I can protect and how to do it properly." The meeting was calm, methodical, grounded in facts rather than feelings, and by the end of it, I realized something important. I wasn't late. I wasn't reacting. I was right on time. The lawyer's office didn't look like the kind of place where lives changed. There were no dramatic paintings. No heavy furniture meant to intimidate. Just neutral walls, clean lines, and a woman in her late 40s who listened more than she spoke. Her name was Margaret Hale. She didn't rush me. She didn't interrupt. She let me tell the story the way it needed to come out. Uneven at first, then steadier as I realized I didn't have to justify myself. When I finished, she nodded once and said something that surprised me. "You're not asking how to take something from them," she said. "You're asking how to keep what's already yours." That distinction mattered. She laid the documents out slowly, explaining each one in plain language. No legal theater, no pressure. The house was mine. Fully. Cleanly. My grandfather had been precise. But ownership, she explained, wasn't just about names on paper. It was about control over access, decision-making, and time. "Families like yours," she said carefully, "don't usually fight with lawsuits. They fight with assumptions." Assumptions were something I understood very well. Margaret suggested something my parents would never expect from me. Not a sale, not a confrontation, not a dramatic declaration. A trust. Irrevocable. Quiet. Once established, it would remove the house from emotional negotiation entirely. Decisions would be governed by rules, not persuasion. Access would be defined. Authority would be documented. No amount of guilt, pressure, or rewritten narratives could touch it. "They'll hate it," Margaret said plainly, "but they won't be able to undo it." I signed the papers 2 days later. There was no ceremony, no music, no feeling of triumph, just relief. Because for the first time, my safety didn't depend on being understood. The part I didn't tell anyone. I didn't tell my parents what I'd done. I didn't tell Rachel. I didn't even hint. I answered calls politely. I listened. I let them talk themselves into certainty. Rachel started texting links, listings, contractors, renovation ideas. She spoke in when, not if. When we move in, when this place is ours, when you're ready to start fresh, I let her. Because confidence makes people careless. They pick the date themselves. A Sunday afternoon, late enough that everything would feel official. Early enough that they could still pretend it was civil. Rachel texted me that morning, "We'll be there around 2. Movers are booked. Don't stress. We've got it handled." Movers. I read the message twice. Then I put my phone down and made coffee. At 1005 I stood by the window and watched the driveway fill. 2 cars. 1 moving truck. Rachel stepped out smiling. Bright, excited, victorious. My parents followed, relaxed in a way they hadn't been in months. They believed the hardest part was already over. When they walked in, Rachel didn't even look at me at first. She was already directing the movers, already discussing where things would go. My mother hugged me quickly. "This will be good for everyone," she whispered, like reassurance was still necessary. My father nodded approvingly. "You handled this maturely." I smiled. Not because I agreed, because it was finally safe to. The movers paused when they reached the living room. One of them cleared his throat. We can't proceed without authorization from the property holder or trustee." Rachel turned, confused. "I'm the owner," she said automatically. The man shook his head. "Ma'am, according to our paperwork, you're not." The silence that followed wasn't loud. It was dense. Rachel laughed once. "That's impossible." I spoke calmly. "It's not." My mother looked at me sharply. "What did you do?" "I made sure no one could decide my life for me again," I said. Rachel's face drained of color as she pulled out her phone, scrolling, dialing, checking emails that would never say what she needed them to. Margaret's card sat on the table. I had placed it there intentionally. The explanation didn't take long. It didn't need to. Everything was documented. Final. Untouchable. My parents tried logic, then emotion, then disappointment. Rachel tried anger. "You planned this," she hissed. I met her eyes. "You planned it first." The movers left quietly. So did the certainty they'd walked in with. They didn't leave right away. No one stormed out. No doors slammed. That would have made things simpler. Instead, they stayed, standing in the living room like people who had arrived early to a party that was suddenly canceled. No one knew what role to play anymore. My mother was the first to speak. "I don't understand," she said quietly. Not angry. Not loud. Just wounded. "Why didn't you tell us?" There it was. Not "why did you do this," but "why didn't you include us?" I took a breath before answering. "Because every time I tried to make a decision for myself," I said, "you told me why it was a bad idea." My father's jaw tightened. "We were trying to help." "I know," I replied. "That's the problem." Rachel hadn't said anything yet. She was staring at the floor, arms crossed, breathing shallowly, like someone fighting the urge to explode in the wrong direction. "You embarrassed me," she finally said, "in front of everyone." "No," I said calmly, "you embarrassed yourself by assuming something that wasn't yours." The words landed harder than I expected, because they were true. My mother sat down slowly, as if her body had suddenly grown heavier. "We're family," she said. "You don't do this to family." I waited. She expected a response. "What you mean," I said after a moment, "is that I broke a rule I was never allowed to question." My father shook his head. "You've changed." "Yes," I said, "I had to." Rachel laughed sharply. "So that's it? You just cut us out?" I looked at her then. Really looked. At the certainty she had always carried. At the way she'd spoken about the house like it had already adjusted itself around her. "I didn't cut you out," I said. I stepped back in. They left an hour later, not together. My father walked out first, shoulders stiff. My mother followed, eyes glossy but dry. The kind of tears meant to be seen later, not now. Rachel was last. She stopped at the door and turned back. "You think you won," she said quietly. I didn't answer. Because winning had never been the point. The silence afterward was louder than the confrontation. No calls, no texts, no holiday plans. At first, it hurt more than I expected. I questioned myself in small, inconvenient moments, standing in the grocery store, folding laundry, waking up too early with nothing to distract me. Had I gone too far? Had I misunderstood their intentions? Had I traded connection for control? But every time doubt crept in, I remembered how easily they had decided for me, how natural it had felt to them. That memory steadied me. I wrote a letter one night. Not to accuse, not to explain, just to tell the truth. I never sent it, because I realized something important before sealing the envelope. People who benefit from your silence rarely respect your honesty. So I folded the letter and placed it back in my grandfather's desk, where it belonged. Without the tension, the house changed. Or maybe I did. I fixed things slowly, thoughtfully. Not to increase value, but to increase comfort. I repainted the living room the color my grandfather used to say felt like early morning. I replaced the broken window latch. I planted herbs near the kitchen. For the first time, I wasn't maintaining something for someone else's future. I was living in my own. Months later, I reread my grandfather's letter. The last line stayed with me. Peace isn't something you're given, he'd written. It's something you protect. I understood that now. Because the quiet that followed wasn't empty. It was mine. The first message came 3 months later. Not from Rachel, from my mother. It arrived on a Tuesday evening, the kind of ordinary day where nothing prepares you for emotional weight. I hope you're well. Your father isn't feeling great lately. Life is short. I don't want regrets. No apology. No accountability. Just a reminder of mortality, sharpened into a tool. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I put my phone face down. Because I finally understood something that had taken me decades to learn, urgency is often manufactured by people who fear losing access. I heard about Rachel through other people. That was new. Apparently, she had been telling anyone who would listen that I had turned cold, that I had changed after inheriting money, that I had let lawyers poison my mind. She framed herself as confused, hurt, betrayed, and maybe she believed it. People like Rachel rarely see themselves as taking something. They see it as ending up where they belong. What shocked her wasn't the loss of the house. It was the loss of certainty. At a family gathering I didn't attend, an aunt reportedly said, "She always was sensitive." Sensitive. That word again, the family's favorite way of shrinking boundaries into flaws. But something unexpected happened. Another relative responded quietly. She was the only one taking care of her grandfather. The room went quiet. That silence mattered more than any confrontation ever could. It happened on an ordinary morning. I was standing at the kitchen sink, sunlight spilling across the counter, the ocean breeze moving the curtains just enough to remind me I was exactly where I wanted to be. And I realized I hadn't thought about Rachel in days. Not with anger, not with fear, not with sadness, just absence. That was when I knew the story was over. Because revenge isn't loud when it works. It fades into irrelevance. I didn't lose my family. I lost the version of family that only worked when I stayed small. What remained were choices. Space. Silence that didn't demand explanation. People often ask what it feels like to win against people who underestimated you. The truth is simpler than they expect. It feels like locking your door at night and realizing you're no longer listening for footsteps. Years from now, if someone asks me why I didn't just give in, why I didn't keep the peace, I'll say this. Because peace that requires self-erasure is just delayed loss. And I had already lost enough.